Welcome to the World United. Welcome to the World United.
Yeah, and at the same time, I want to welcome Christopher Sellers. Do you prefer Christopher or Chris?
Chris is fine. Only my mother calls me Christopher, and only when I'm in trouble.
Okay, you're not in trouble right now, so I shall welcome Chris Sellers. Chris, I'd like to introduce you a little bit with your bio, if that's okay.
Please.
Okay. Chris is known as Australia's leading expert on creativity and creative skill sets. Over the last 15 years, Chris has consulted, developed, and coached for a kaleidoscope of industries, amongst them BBC, Netflix, intelligence, and telecoms. He worked with leaders invested in optimal creative skill sets, cultures conducive to creativity and leading ideas. Disruption prompts change. It's time for a shift. The theme of the presentation is the 6 critical creative skill sets every organization must understand. I can't wait. Please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Gabrielle. And thanks for inviting me as well to talk at the Global Transformation Festival. It's a privilege, and I feel very humbled to sort of be part of a collective in this sense. I try to design a lot of my work around being the solution and the change that you want to see. So it's really nice to have this, being in a collective that shares this kind of ethic. So a brief sort of overview. Yeah, I describe my career as 15 years of hopscotch between corporate and creative. I'm a professional trained actor and theatre screenwriter. Started self-producing and writing and performing all of my own work. So then went to London, optioned some projects for the BBC and Netflix in its infancy, came back to Sydney, Australia, where I am now, and did a lot of work in leadership and development, designing HR role play scenarios and assessments, basically. So a lot of back and forth. So that's enough about me. I'll get into the talk, and what I've created for you guys as of yesterday is a 25-minute workshop video that sort of explains these 6 creative skill sets, the necessity for them in education, work, and life, really, to give you some clarity on the creative process and also a vision of the future of where we can take it from there. So very, very simply, I'll share my screen, which should be fine. And then I've got it queued up for QuickTime, and I'll play this and be able to step out. It runs for about 25 minutes, so I'll see you guys on the other end, and hopefully we won't have any other issues. What are the 6 creative skill sets that are critical for the future of work and education? In this talk, we're going to take a deep dive to look at how we got here and how we can fix it. Once upon a time in Greece, circa 350 BC, Aristotle's demonstrated range of knowledge included biology, botany, chemistry, ethics, metaphysics, rhetoric, physics, poetics, political theory, and psychology. He pioneered the study of zoology and was the founder of formal logic. Now, one fateful day, Aristotle was summoned by King Philip of Macedonia to act as a tutor to his 13-year-old son. And within 20 years, this prince had conquered most of the known world as a skilled strategist, general, and politician, now known as Alexander the Great. Now, despite convention, Alexander allowed conquered societies to retain their religious and political institutions, even evolving past his tutor's belief of keeping non-Greeks as slaves. Alexander was also reportedly to be an excellent dancer. So when we review the cradle of education, whether it's the Greeks, the Romans, or the Mesopotamians, we find language and philosophy and the arts were a parallel import as math, science, and politics. There was an understanding that these subjects harmonized and enhanced each other. The culture was one of curiosity, open critique was encouraged. The goal of education was to produce
wise, well-rounded citizens. So what happened? If we skip ahead to the modern day, we find there's a global demand for creativity and creative skill sets. The likes of Forbes, CNBC, and the Financial Times all cite creative skill sets as the most in-demand skills to master. Organizations cite innovation and problem solving as the must-have skills for the future. Scaling in parallel, we observe an increased demand for emotional intelligence, a need for greater empathy and clearer communication. Disruptions like COVID-19 exposed a lack of ability to adapt intelligently. Now, the fact that these issues are global, they're systemic, and rife cross-industry, both personally and professionally, should tip us to the notion that something very serious is awry. Now, the global demand for creativity is a paradoxical issue. Collectively, as a civilization, we're more educated than we ever have been, and more of us are educated than we ever have been. And we're living in an age where information is abundant, it's immediately accessible, and it's free. So if there's a demand for creativity, it might be worth asking, how did we get here? And where did this demand come from? I break down in detail the reasons how and why in my upcoming book, Applied Creativity. But in short, this is a values problem. It's not a skills problem. We don't value creativity as highly as other skill sets. Over time, the Socratic model of education has been replaced by enclosed institutions. For most of us, math, science, and English were compulsory subjects where art, music, and drama were all just elective hobbies. This trend continues into tertiary education. Economics, engineering, and law carry more weight than philosophy, dance, or a secondary language. And why is this? Because the process of education has evolved to skill you for a singular occupation. As such, creativity has been quantified, diluted, and dismissed in favor of linear form fitting function. Skills such as composition, adaptability, and originality are mute within a syllabus that only requires you to read, replicate, and recite from given sources. As a result, our ability to think critically, to adapt intelligently, compose anything original, emotionally express ourselves, or connect with others has deteriorated over time simply because it isn't practiced. In short, there seems to be no applicable value, which brings us in line with the current issue, this global demand for creativity. A demand implies a deficit. If creative skill sets are in such global, widespread demand, you must first concede that you don't have them. So what are the 6 creative skill sets and how can we develop them? Imagine, if you can, there was some kind of global disruption and the standard way of doing things no longer applies. Now, the silver lining with disruptions is when something fails, you're gifted an opportunity to improve it. And this is where innovation and problem solving are of some use to improve and enhance existing systems and process. Now, your ability to interpret context and empathize with changing needs requires a level of emotional intelligence if you're going to adapt effectively. Perhaps you recognize it's more strategic to be proactive. To lead, you must move ahead of the curve and design solutions that are sustainable and mitigate risk. Now, to be proactive requires a level of composition since you're looking to create something new. So how can you effectively and reliably ideate something original? So these are the 6 creative skill sets that I most commonly work with. And by addressing creativity in this way, as tangible skills that can be learned, developed, and improved, I begin to remove the mysticism and the magic from creativity and creative process. My question for you is, do you really believe that these skills exist in isolation, independent from one another? Or can you see how all of these skills are versatile, interdependent, and creativity informs each and every one of them? Now, this confluence of creative skill sets is the shift in thinking that provides the quantum leap in outcomes. This is what empowers you to become proactive, prolific, leading, and original. So how might we develop these skill sets? Let's take a walk through and I'll break down each one individually. Innovation, to improve existing systems and process. Now, this is something that we're probably the most familiar with. Innovation, it relies on existing systems or process. So law, tech, and medicine are all excellent examples of foundational systems that are constantly being adjusted. Now, innovation has two Achilles heels. The first is if the dominant system is flawed, you are still bound to it, much like a legal system. Right? Second is if the systems are interdependent, like often in IT and tech, you can't alter one without wreaking havoc on all the rest. Yeah, just something to be aware of. So if you're looking to improve or develop your innovative process, a really simple example is to learn how to cook. Learn the recipe, replicate the recipe, improve the recipe. Simple. This is a very basic breakdown of innovation. Learn the thing, produce the thing, improve the thing. Problem solving, to fix what's broken, to restore it to what it was. So mechanics do this constantly, and they're often working with incomplete information in order to do so. So if you wish to improve your problem solving skills, simple things like Sudokus, crossword puzzles are excellent examples of how you can practice working with incomplete information, find patterns, troubleshoot, and solve. There's a reason why MI5 anonymously tested crossword experts during the World War II while trying to crack the German Enigma code. There's a savvy MI5 agent who recognized transferable traits of recognizing patterns and deciphering missing information. Composition and design, the arrangement of elements to achieve the most beneficial outcome. It sounds probably a little bit abstract, but simply, if you understand symmetry, then you understand composition and design. If you understand musical notes and how they join to form musical chords and how these chords can align to create musical harmonies, then you understand composition and design. Okay? A simple exercise to develop composition, you may remember a few years back the popularity in coloring in books. Yeah? Really, really simple. You're given a stencil, you choose the colors that you want to express yourself. This is a really basic and sort of childlike exercise in expression and composition. Yeah. A more technical example is conditional logic in coding. Now, do you really need 50 independent data points to arrive at an outcome? Or can we compose 4 or 5 either or questions to move our candidate to the information that they need? Yeah. The arrangement of elements to achieve the most beneficial outcome. Adaptability, the intelligent response to change and the inclusion of alternative sources. So adaptability has 2 independent sort of definitions. Okay, your ability to adapt, to react to something, for example, to improvise. It's a trait that's not often flexed outside of emergency responses. Now, I have developed a few notable scenarios which assess adaptability. One in particular for intelligence candidates, the hotel room, which specifically flexed their capacity to adapt and make critical strategic decisions under pressure and in real time. Only one candidate passed. So if you're interested in learning about how and why they passed, you can download the first chapter of my book on my website, and I'll just put the link below. The second definition of adaptability also includes adapting alternative sources. So your ability to look outside of your bubble and to observe other individuals, other organizations, other practices that have similarities to your own, but what you can adapt and improve from them. As an example, I was contracted to a tech startup a few years back and successfully redesigned their entire contractor business model within one day with no tech changes at zero cost by adapting a gambling algorithm. If you're interested, you can ask me how. Originality, to create something new that has never existed. Originality is interesting since it is achieved in the opposite method to how we would assume. We often feel like it's inspiration, it's that lightning bolt, it's that eureka moment that gives us an original idea. It's actually the opposite. To achieve anything original, you need a rather informed opinion of what's come before you. So genuine originality, original concepts that are effective and useful, is actually achieved by deep introspection and research. By exploring your subject and all the way out to the edges, this is where you start to discover the fringes of what's possible, what has or hasn't been done, and allows you to critically assess what already exists. In business terms, originality translates to your key point of difference, and this is how you lead, by doing something new. So originality is incredibly important as an ethic and a discipline, and something that's most commonly overlooked and dismissed as fluke or random luck. The last creative skill set is emotional intelligence, to empathetically understand different points of view. Now, this is perhaps the most complex and personal to develop, because the only way to develop genuine empathy is to feel a lot of different emotions. And in experiencing these emotions, you begin to understand how they affect you and what behavior they manifest. Now, certain areas of medicine draw these types of personalities. Nurses, counselors, psychologists, for instance. We would all like them to have a degree of empathy. However, I'm sure we've all run into one or two examples within these fields who completely lack empathetic understanding. A lot of my earlier work was designing role-play scenarios for surgeons to retrain empathy, because 5 years of intensive medical training had conditioned them to view the body purely as a machine with moving parts. Now, the safest way to explore emotion and develop your emotional intelligence is to engage in the arts. Philosophy is going to challenge your way of thinking. Film, theatre, music, going to galleries and going to museums all challenge our beliefs of who we are, how we feel, how we deal with grief and loss and jealousy and spite and lust. And this is the most important lesson I find, is that genuine emotional intelligence requires all of the emotions on the spectrum, not just the polite, sanitized version we share with friends. So for healthy, robust, mature emotional intelligence, it's necessary for us to explore these areas of ourselves. In summary, by approaching creativity as 6 tangible skill sets that may be developed and improved, it also demonstrates how creative application is versatile and universal. We can observe Steve Jobs inventing a personal home computer in 1974, and we can identify how this is composition, originality, and innovation. Just as Picasso painting his Weeping Woman is a demonstration of composition, originality, and innovation of artistic styles, Picasso also invented Cubism, an entirely new artistic genre. And this is what elevates Jobs, Picasso, Nietzsche, Nikola Tesla, Maya Angelou, Akira Kurosawa, Aristotle, and Alexander. Creativity is the single deciding factor between those who are good and those who are exceptional. So here's what we know. The thinking, systems, culture, and tools that have delivered us to where we are increasingly recognized as dysfunctional for where we wish to go. The good news is we are in the perfect position for a hard reset. 2,500 years ago, Aristotle and friends were aware that the knowledge of the universe was observable within their garden. It's a poetic sentiment. We are now living this reality with a universe of information in the palm of our hand. So in rediscovering the necessity for creative skill sets, should we begin to shift our values? And should our goal be to cultivate wise, healthy citizens, we begin to move towards the dawn of a second Renaissance. Imagine if every student, yourself included, could approach any topic of curiosity and apply these 6 creative skill sets: learning, research, play, and development. How much faster and comprehensively could you process information, compare variable sources, and compose unique, sustainable outcomes? So should creativity move into focus, and should this focus move into practice, we begin to cultivate a society of Aristotles and Alexanders, of Da Vinci's and Rousseau's, who are courageous, learned, compassionate, deeply curious of the world around them, a civilization empowered by enlightened thinking rather than dependence on tools. So this concludes my talk on the 6 creative skill sets. I'd like to thank you for sitting with me through this, and I hope you found it helpful. If you'd like some more information on me and how I work, feel free to reach out directly, and I'll leave my contact details on the following title slate. Thanks again, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.
Chris,
And back.
thank you. That was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant, and so needed, you know, for everyone, not just for organizations, but really for everyone to hear. I liked how you summarized, like, how would our world be if we had all wise, healthy citizens? And we started that at school, you know, looking at what is taught at school right now and what is missing, because I'm very passionate about children, and I feel their education, and they're at the start of their life. If they get that already, if they get emotional intelligence, innovation, adaptability, you know, and all the other points early on, how brilliant would that be? Yeah, did you want to share anything?
Yeah, I agree. My early background is in education and pedagogy, and it's exactly that, like the way we learn. And I'm in the book, I talk about the observations of play, for instance, in terms of creative process, and we observe it in children. But normally the biggest disconnect I find, as a quick summary, is it's a disconnect of translation. Like, for instance, if Tommy wants to learn the trumpet, you know, at 6, your parents and, you know, a lay person will look at that and go, well, you'll never be a musician. You're kind of missing the point. The skills that are developed here, like technical expertise of an instrument, sure, but emotional intelligence in terms of expressing, composition, originality, adaptability, all of these skills, which are overlooked, you know, in general. And this is precisely the point, is we conflate the outcome. We watch an artist on stage and go, well, that's magic, I can't do it. It's like, well, it's actually a highly disciplined skill set that they're demonstrating in line with originality, composition, adaptability, and all of these skill sets. The same way that Jobs would apply it to invention, the same way that Nietzsche applied it to original thought, you know, these sorts of things. So that's precisely, it's the first step, is to understand the value, I believe, in these things. And then once you understand that value, you can explore it in any way, in any shape and form you wish. It's entirely up to you. It's the diminishment and dismissal of creative skill sets, which is really an issue, and what's delivered us to where we are right now, in my opinion.
I totally understand where you're coming from. I do, because there's so much more, like, for example, like you're saying, to learning, whether that's an instrument or anything else. There's so many aspects, you know. You need to be resilient, you need to be emotionally intelligent to deal with the journey, because not all is smooth, you know. No. You need to know, you need to know what you feel.
No, and without having too much of a rant, I start drawing a lot of parallels between if there's increased occurrences of like mental health dysfunction and behavioral, substance abuse and all these sorts of things. In my view, it's like, well, is this not a root issue of a lack of emotional intelligence and expression? Like if I'm not permitted either in school or relationships in a family to express myself in my way without being censored or dismissed, then over time, like it's a massive snowball effect. So are we surprised really that, and I mentioned this in the book, like on the surface, it's problem solving and innovation. Oh, we need these things for business. Sure. At the same time, the demand for empathy and emotional intelligence has scaled directly in parallel. Now, is this a coincidence? Well, I don't think so, and I can prove that it's not, as well as all of these other skills. So if you look at one thing siloed, then best of luck solving that symptom. There's a root issue here, which is fundamentally missing. And the irony is that ideas are free. Quality ideas propagate specific high value solutions. So you can spend hundreds of thousands on the new program, hundreds of thousands of X, Y, and Z. Seeing as we're all intelligent, skilled individuals, if we were allowed the time to think and process information in our own way, how much further we could all take ourselves. And this is a bit of an irony, I find, is normally when I talk to engineers and tech folk who innovation and problem solving is their life. I'm like, well, if there's 6 skill sets and you can understand that these are the 6 skill sets, you're using 2 of the 6. And you're using 2 of the 6 inefficiently. So I live in the world of optimal. Like there's good, better, and best. And I push for optimal, for best outcomes, healthiest life, healthiest living. If you're satisfied with doing what you're doing for the results that you're achieving, then fine, But again, globally, when you witness, we have this demand in every industry, personally and professionally. It's not a coincidence. So we should really start asking, how did we get here before we start guessing at solutions? That's my view anyway.
Absolutely, I totally get it, and it's so important. Not everyone will develop all skills to the same level. As you said, some possibly engineering staff, might have some aspects more developed than others, but absolutely they all need to be developed because they all make up the whole.
Yeah, that's true. And there's a little point I just want to jump in there because I deal with a lot of people who challenge, which is great. And yes, people do have a predisposition to certain types. We notice high emotional intelligence in artists, but we tend to go, oh, artists have this, and that's not quite the case. And the analogy I give is like, look, if you observe the NBA, if you observe every professional basketball player, they're generally all over 6 foot, and the majority are Black, they're African American. So logically, you could infer if you're Black and over 6 foot, you can play professional basketball. Now, the reality is, like, I'm over 6 foot, but I'm not so great at basketball. So being tall is advantageous to play basketball, but it doesn't make me a basketball player. Having emotional intelligence is advantageous for certain fields in certain realms. It doesn't make you an artist or a counselor or a surgeon. There's a skill set. There's a specific skill set that's required. And that's sort of the other half of this equation, which I talk about in the book. You need a mastery of a skill set in line, harmonized with creative practice. That's what Picasso demonstrated as equally as Jobs. And this is there's this conflation of, oh, they're loud and they love attention, they must be an actor. It's like, I love standing on stage, but I'm the most introverted person. When I'm not on stage, I'm in a cafe by myself with a journal, and maybe 1 or 2 friends. It's these skill sets which are generally misunderstood, mistranslated, and devalued. So the majority of my work, either one-on-one working with executives as a coach, or talking to the board and running workshops, is getting them to A, understand how these work, and B, for them, would you recognize, create high value, atypical concepts if they came to you? Because the punchline is, Jobs and Wozniak designed their first PC with Atari parts and took it to Atari and said, you can have it, just give us a job. And Atari said no. Then they took the same product to Hewlett Packard, who didn't even let them in the door because you haven't been to university. So hindsight is always perfect. So every CEO likes to think, oh no, I would totally recognize that. It's like, well, original concepts by definition are atypical. So do you have the foresight, the objectivity, the scope, really? And so as well as these 6 skill sets to develop creative process, they also give you a template to vet ideas and concepts that come to you, because not every new idea is amazing and innovative. Not every actor is amazing and innovative, but also you can develop that for yourself, but also you can vet the concepts that come to you. And if you're paying, $100 grand for a strategic consultant to give you a great idea, it better tick every box, on the list.
No, I really like your analogies because it makes it clear for people, A, that we're all different, but that one certain aspect of us that's highly developed does not necessarily mean our journey is determined. You can be 6 foot tall and you're no good at sport at all, let alone basketball. But you can also be 6 foot tall and have that skill set and develop that. But, I really love that focus on for everyone to develop all aspects to the extent that they need for them to be in life as a better person, and especially to look at, I'm very much into emotional intelligence, recognizing what's going on in us, being able to look at ourselves really clearly and honestly and saying, this is what I do really well. This is what I don't do so well. I actually would not see a car park if there was one in front of me. I'd drive past it. It's one of the other analogies people use, and to say, well, what can I do to develop that a little bit?
Yeah. The emotional intelligence is something I'm glad you picked up on, and it's something I'd like to talk about specifically, because I mentioned it a little bit in the talk, but most people say emotional intelligence and they immediately think empathy, and that's all it is. And you go, yeah, that's part of it. But the ugly truth of most actual emotional development is that it's gross. It's not pretty. If you have to start in introspection and self-examination, brings up, where you failed, where shame lies, where heartbreak, rejection, all of these sorts of things. We sort of credit for things well done, but the genuine, emotional intelligence is this acceptance and concession of oneself, I suppose, and all the things that reside there. Now, dealing with this and going through this is awfully, awfully uncomfortable. And this takes, it's like sitting in a hot bath. You want to jump out immediately, but you need to just sort of get comfortable with this simmering discomfort, because that's where the growth is. And I talk a little bit about it in the book. It's healthy. The problem is with developing emotional intelligence for most of us is that as soon as we feel uncomfortable, our risk response flares up immediately, and it interprets this as, oh, this is a threat. I'm uncomfortable. This is something new. I don't recognize it. This is why, a lot of innovation is passed on, because people are risk averse. This is the actual manifestation of it. I see something new. I see something atypical. I see something I don't recognize. I feel uncomfortable. I can't quite cognitively explain what this is. Just feel uncomfortable, not so sure about it. It's a risk. I'll avoid it. Yeah. And that's a cycle of see something new, feel uncomfortable, avoid it. So we don't really develop or grow anywhere. And so in terms of developing emotional intelligence, if that's all you do, you have a really hard time. And then when you hit that heartbreak, when you hit that rejection, when depression creeps up on you, all of these sorts of things, we feel we don't have the tools to manage it. And for most of us in professional life, that's hit, late 20s, 30s, 40s, you're having a really, really hard time coping when, like you identified, if you had the option to express this and explore this in school, in youth, and feel accepted and that it's all okay, you'd have a little bit more compassionate understanding of yourself and then, with others. Look, the really simple example I give was, I'm a professional actor, and my acting college audition was a monologue from Europe by Michael Gow, Australian playwright. Young guy follows his girl, like a woman he loves, to Europe, falls in love with her, they break up, and he has this impassioned, heartbreaking speech of being left alone and being vulnerable and all these sorts of things. And so delivered this monologue for my audition, and the tutor on the panel said, "That was great. Can you do it again as a salesman on an infomercial?" Now, in any other industry, this is a ridiculous request, but for an actor and anyone within the arts, emotional flexibility, emotional range is an intrinsic skill set for the job, right? So could I, on a dime, turn and within 30 seconds give you a completely authentic, truthful, emotionally opposite performance? Now, in the arts, acting, music, all these sorts of things, they at least engage in this area. They say what you've got is great and what you can do is great, but we're going to stretch and expand this, and we're going to challenge it, and we're going to put you in uncomfortable positions. And one of the major benefits that you develop within the arts is, can I feel like something else? And, can I feel lust and envy and spite and fury and all of these things? How does it affect me? Because it's my job to authentically portray it for strangers every night and have them believe me. And then settle back into normal Chris mode and everything's going to be okay. So can I go to this place? Can I go to these emotional places and still feel safe and be accepted? And this specifically is what HR and corporates try to replicate in corporate trust and HR building and all this sort of this, and authenticity and empathy. But I really clearly make the points, like empathy, emotional intelligence, all of the emotions on the spectrum, not just the polite ones in a feedback session. And so again, this is the difference between good, better, and best. If you want genuine empathy, if you want genuine emotional intelligence, without cheating, because it's even outside of the job, it's your life. It's your life. It's your relationships. It's the people you surround yourself with. It's the way that you connect with others. That's more significant, I feel, is that sort of authentic self. But that's why I'm an artist and I'm different.
Well, I think it's an art form in itself to be, strong enough to say, I'm going to face these uncomfortable feelings, that I have, and gently so. We don't have to dive into them. Like you say, just sit with them, because only then growth can happen. If we go back to our place where we feel safe, which may not be safe, but we feel safe, and avoid those uncomfortable feelings, there's no growth. There's no knowing, no resilience at the end of the day, saying, hey, I can be really angry and I can handle it, but then I can go back to my other self that feels loving and kind. So, you really pointed that out beautifully, and it gives us tools, like you're saying. It's like having a little toolbox. The more you learn about yourself, and the more you improve your own skills, they're there for you to use whenever you need them. So I found that quite amazing. And one other point I wanted to make is you finished off with saying, empathy needs to be authentic, because if it's not, it shows. People know. You cannot pretend to try to understand someone or be in their shoes and you really don't. And I've experienced that in leadership, like being employed in places, and it shows. It's not good. As a leader, you need to have it down pat. Is that sort of what you do when you go into companies to help people with those sort of things?
Yeah, genuinely, in coaching one-on-one, it's interesting. Like the workshops I do with the board or C-suite, they're like, oh well, how can we leverage creativity for X, Y, and Z? And that's great. That's project stuff, which I really love. The one-on-one coaching stuff is normally these leaders who feel a little bit of a disconnect. Like I understand what it is. I love my wife and my kids. Is that the same? Is that what I have to bring to the workplace? I'm like, it's beautiful that you want to go that way, but not quite. You're not necessarily going to have that attachment, but it's interesting. In developing your own emotional intelligence, instead of breaking this cycle of avoidance, it's you feel uncomfortable, then you develop the resilience to sort of overcome or manage this, and then sort of succeed and fly and realize that you won't die. And then you meet the next thing, and it becomes this cycle of growth. Then it's the same as once you travel abroad. If you go solo, you know what I mean? You realize you end up in a strange world, in a strange place, and no one speaks the language, but you adapt and you figure out that, no, I can figure out my way around and I can survive. And then travel is no longer scary because you've gone on that journey, you've taken that trip, you survived, might have been knocked around a bit, but that's all part of the fun, and you've gained so much more richness from this. And once you start to develop this sort of cycle, once you move into a workplace, or once strangers don't seem threatening, new ideas don't threaten your ego or sense of intelligence. This is where this deep sense of curiosity actually comes from, because you want to know more about things and other people. And this is a term that's casually thrown around, like, oh, be curious. We this is what we need for learning. It's like, again, you're identifying an outcome, but you've actually taken away all the tools and skills that allows anyone to be curious. Tommy wants to be curious with the trumpet. He wants to explore that, but you don't want him to be a musician. And then again, this translates much, much later to life. It's like, why pursue this thing if there's not a direct, tangible, productive outcome? And this is a model of productivity, which I'll talk about at another time. But genuine empathy in the workplace, or working with leadership and staff, requires a massive shift. It requires a massive realignment. And I mentioned in one of my other videos in the Lockdown Creativity series, it's like, quite frankly, if you're looking at the corporate world to develop authenticity and trust, you're fundamentally looking in the wrong place. It's like crabs boiling in a pot. We'll both get each other out of this. It's like, there's no way. So if you say that you want these things, if you say you want genuine innovation, if you say you want genuine original ideas, if you want to come up, and this is, I know I'm jumping all over the place, but this is what separates Jobs, Picasso, Nietzsche, and all the other ones. They were prolific. They did more than one thing once. They have an extended body of work behind them, almost up until the day they died. So they're prolific. They were proactive. They weren't reactive. That's a massive, massive difference. Innovation, you're only ever reactive. You want to be proactive in life if you want to lead, or even just as an individual to feel like you take some sort of independent control of yourself and autonomy. They were original, now we're leading, because they were prolific and proactive. So if these are the traits that you wish to develop, it requires a shift. Einstein summed it up. It's like, you cannot solve this problem with the same thinking that has delivered us here. And attempting to apply a linear a linear mathematical model of assessment to creativity, which is fundamentally personal and abstract, makes absolutely no sense, right? It's you provide superficial outcomes. It's just another language that the majority of folk don't quite understand. It's trying to apply English grammar to the French language. It does not translate. So learn to speak French. Be bilingual. That's the best way to go.
I love that. That's a beautiful finishing note. And I love that you are curious about life, and that you bringing your passion to this world through the work you do. And I have felt it in the last 45 minutes, like you've really touched my heart with your presentation, and I cannot thank you enough. I hope you can I hope you can join us at 3:30 tonight, this afternoon, for the closing ceremony.
I'm back. I know I'm back at 12 for a panel discussion on track 3. So I'll be there for that. And then I think that goes for 2 hours, I think. And so it'll wrap up right in time. So I've got a day of spending my time with it.
It would be wonderful. Yeah. We're hoping to see some people to join the council for next year as well, some creative people. So keep that in mind. Thank you, Chris. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you later, I hope.
Yes, and thank you all.
Thank you.